Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel and thank you for joining me for another true crime video. I hope you guys are all having a fantastic day so far. For today's video, we are diving into week 6 of the Karen Read trial with over 50 state witnesses. This week we hear from some forensic experts who testify on the physical evidence found, which included some apparent glass and apparent plastic. That's really how they refer to it scientifically, as apparent. We also hear about the damage that was done to Karen Read's SUV, as well as the evidence found on John O'Keefe's clothing. In addition to these experts, we also hear from former trooper, now Sergeant Buchanan, who we also find out is Trooper Proctor's supervisor. So let's go ahead and dive right in because there is a lot to unpack. On Monday, jurors first heard from the head of the state police CERT team, Lieutenant Kevin O'Hara. O'Hara testified to having his team search 34 Fairview on January 29th with shovels, rakes, brooms, flashlights. They had headlamps. They uncovered 6 or 7 pieces of taillight and John O'Keefe's missing sneaker. Now, at this point in this trial, I was under the impression that his sneaker and his baseball cap were never uncovered. However, this week we find out that is not the case. Why we are just finding that out 6 weeks in, I have no idea. Now, all of this evidence found by the CERT team were seemingly found in a very small proximity of one another. Lieutenant O'Hara mentioned that as he was putting place markers kind of in a digital program showing where these markers were located in relation to the house, he was unable to place all of them because they were essentially right on top of one another. And this area in which all of this evidence was found was in the area where the prosecution alleges where Karen Read hit John O'Keefe. But this would not be the only evidence found. Interestingly, Lieutenant O'Hara and his team searched Fairview on a single day for just maybe over an hour. And when they arrived, it was fairly dark outside. Now, because it was dark when they began their search at just around 5 p.m., Lieutenant O'Hara testified to offering for him and his team to come back to search the area during daylight. However, as we find out, Lieutenant O'Hara was never called back to the scene. Now, over the next few weeks, additional pieces of glass and taillight were found at the scene, but during the cross-examination, the defense pointed out how unlikely or odd it is that the pieces that were found on the days or weeks following that initial search by the CERT team, the pieces that were found later on were substantially bigger in size. Some of these pieces were 6 or 7 inches wide. Additionally, the pieces that were found later on, which seem to have been found by Trooper Buchanan and Trooper Proctor, they didn't tag where those pieces were found in relation to the rest of the pieces. They have no indication of where those pieces were found, meaning they could have been found 5 feet away, 10 feet away. We really don't know, which is probably why they should have called the CERT team to come back in to make sure that that scene was done properly. But as we've seen throughout this trial, none of this seems to really have been done properly, which leaves the door wide open for speculation. Then we hear from forensic scientist Maureen Hartnett. Hartnett testified to observing a dent, scratches, and glass that was found on the bumper on the back right corner panel of Karen Read's SUV. Now, all of these observations were made once the SUV was taken into custody and stored in the Sally Port of the Canton Police Department. This is the same Sally Port that we saw at the beginning of this trial, where Karen Read's SUV can be seen right next to the unsecured bag of red Solo cups containing what we believe to be blood. Now, along with the damage done to the SUV as well as the glass, Hartnett also found an apparent hair, which seems to be consistent with a human hair. Now, this human hair has been sent out for DNA testing, but as far as I know, we haven't heard the results to see who that hair belongs to. Hartnett also introduced us to photos that were taken of John O'Keefe's clothing on the night that he died, which included a pair of jeans, an orange kind of graphic t-shirt, as well as a light hoodie type sweatshirt. Now, each article of clothing can be seen with large cuts kind of throughout them, which we can assume were made from the EMTs as they were removing his clothes to give him life-saving treatment. In addition, on each article of clothing, you can also see some reddish brown stains, which did test positive for blood. Now, as we get a closer view of this hoodie, there are 9 markers from the arm all the way down to where the wrist would be of that sweatshirt, showing to be what appears to me as puncture marks. Now, if you remember a few weeks back, a DNA expert, or excuse me, an animal DNA expert testified that the swabs she received from this shirt did not detect human DNA. However, she did detect pig DNA. So how in the world did John O'Keefe's sleeve come in contact with something that would leave behind pig DNA? Here's my theory. The animal DNA expert testified that it is possible for dog treats such as rawhide that's made with pork to test positive for pig DNA. And when I'm looking at the damage done to John O'Keefe's sleeve, it reminded me of when my dog was much smaller. He's a 160-pound Malamute now, but even when he was smaller, he would jump on me when I came home from work and leave damage to my clothes that looks to be identical with John O'Keefe's sleeve. I can't tell you how many shirts and sweatshirts I had to throw away because he would put holes in my clothes. Now, anybody with a dog can testify that as a dog is eating a treat, they use their front paws to hold that treat in place as they are chewing on it, leading me to believe that the pig DNA found on John O'Keefe's sleeve was likely transferred from a dog. If somebody has a better explanation as to how the puncture marks on the sleeve, the injuries to John O'Keefe's arm happened by anything other than a dog, more specifically, how in the world it would happen by an SUV, I'm all ears. But let's go ahead and get to the cross-examination of this witness. Defense attorney Alan Jackson noted that Karen Reed's SUV with the apparent hair and glass was driven by Karen Reed to her parents' house in Dighton, Massachusetts, which is about 30 miles away, back to the Canton Police Department during a snowstorm with high winds, questioning how any of this evidence could have remained on this vehicle. As per this witness's testimony, she mentioned that none of the glass or the hair was actually embedded in the vehicle. It was sort of just sitting on the bumper. Now, something that I question as I'm hearing all of this, we've heard a number of testimonies throughout this trial, including this week, of Karen Reed pointing out her taillight to Carrie Roberts, Jen McCabe. This week, we saw video of her pointing it out to her father. At least that's what it looks like the video is showing. So she's looking at her taillight a number of times, but she doesn't wipe it off or dust it off. She just leaves all of that evidence there. Considering that the prosecution is charging her with second-degree intentional murder, it seems odd that she wouldn't try to clean it up the best that she could. She didn't wipe it down with anything. It just doesn't really add up for me. Now, back to this witness's cross-examination. She testified that she was also the one who swabbed the apparent blood. You know, the blood that was stored in these red Solo cups? Yeah, that blood. She swabbed this blood, and during her questioning, it came out that out of these 6 samples, she only tested 1. Out of these 6 red Solo cups, only 1 was tested. How she chose which one to test, your guess is as good as mine. I don't know. I'm certainly no expert. I am not a professional, but it seems as if only testing 1 out of 6 blood samples at a crime scene is a problem. And the problem doesn't end there.
How did you take those swabs? Was the swab done in 1 Solo cup, or did you take a swab from all 6? Or how did you take those swabs that you ultimately did take?
I took those swabs from 1 Solo cup.
How did you choose which of the 6 Solo cups you were going to take a swab from?
I don't recall exactly how I chose which cup. It was reported to me that those cups came from the same area of red brown staining, so you make an assumption that they're all related. It came from what I was told, it came from 1 area of red brown stain at the scene.
And you, of course, know as a forensic criminalist that bloodstains can contain multiple contributors, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
You don't know as you sit here which blood stain found at the scene related to which solo cup in the bag, correct?
Objection.
I'll allow it.
No, it was my understanding they were all taken from the same stain, but I was not there.
From the same scene or?
Stain, excuse me. It was my understanding they were all taken from the same stain.
Okay. If they in fact were taken from multiple stains, you would have no way of knowing that as you sit here.
That's correct.
And ultimately, once you did take that swab from that single solo cup, what did you do with the rest of that blood evidence?
I left that with the Canton Police Department.
Was there any of the swab? By the way, I should ask this. I've been saying swabs. Was there one swab taken of that one solo from that one solo cup, or were there multiple swabs taken?
There were 2 swabs taken.
Of those 2 swabs, did you seek to do DNA testing, or was DNA testing done on either one of those or both of them?
DNA testing was not done on those swabs.
So as we sit here now, there's been no DNA confirmation of what who that blood relates to, I should say.
There was no testing done on it at all.
And so therefore, we would not know if there were multiple contributors to those stains or that swab that you took from that single solo cup.
That's correct.
Okay.
Can somebody explain to me how this is acceptable? We are 6 weeks in, over 50 state witnesses, and we don't even know whose blood was found at the crime scene. Sure, we can speculate, but it would be certainly unethical for a jury to convict a woman and perhaps send her to prison for the rest of her life based on speculation. It's unbelievable to me. I can't believe that this case ever went to trial. I've never seen anything like this before. But moving on, in the middle of the week, we heard from Ashley Valliere, a forensic scientist at the State Police Crime Lab, who testified that she examined the pieces of apparent plastic allegedly found at the crime scene. Now, as she put these pieces together, sort of like a puzzle, she explained how they all fit together and seemed to fit into the taillight housing of Karen Reed's SUV. Now, what I found to be quite interesting during her direct testimony, as Prosecutor Lally is showing her photos of these evidence bags of when these apparent pieces of plastic or glass were found at the crime scene, we noticed how they were found kind of day after day after day. I noticed January 29th, which I believe it's safe to assume was that initial CERT operation. Then I see February 8th, February 11th, February 14th, and February 18th, 3 weeks after that initial search. Now, for whatever reason, these bags of evidence weren't submitted to the lab until March 14th of 2022, which again, certainly raises some red flags for me. Some of you out there may not think that's a problem, but for me, it seems to be very suspicious. Perhaps if that was just the only issue on itself, it wouldn't have been that big of a problem. But as we see these problems continuously stacking up, everything is starting to look like a red flag to me. If anything, this entire investigation is one giant red flag. How is it that this CERT operation took place when the snow was about 18 inches? They had 7 guys out there, as they said, shoulder to shoulder, kind of doing a grid search of this area, using shovels. They were scooping up the snow, searching through the snow to see if there's any evidence, and they weren't able to find all of these pieces that were found in the days and weeks afterwards. These large 6 or 7 inch pieces. It just doesn't seem realistic to me. How were these pieces missed? If I were to be taking an investigation seriously, being the fact that 34 Fairview, they never sectioned it off. They never secured the area outside of maybe those first couple of hours when nobody was around. But over those next 3 weeks, that scene was completely unsecured, leaving the possibility that somebody could be walking by, find a piece of evidence, and throw it away, not knowing what it is. Look, again, I am no professional. I'm not going to pretend to be. But if I was in that position, I would probably take out a generator, hook up a couple heaters, and melt that snow on its own rather than waiting for nature to take its course. I would have put a tent over the area or something else to secure that area to make sure that everything was wrapped up as quickly as possible. But leaving that crime scene open for 3 weeks just seems so irresponsible. How do we know if evidence was placed there? How do we know if evidence wasn't messed with? Like it just leaves too much out in the open. Now, Bollier was able to reconstruct the taillight with these pieces of evidence that were found in this 3-week span. But interestingly, there were pieces still missing from the top left area of that taillight.
That is the reconstruction, the final reconstruction that you were able to do, correct? You would agree with me that there's one section of that taillight that was missing completely, correct?
Correct.
And that missing section is noticeably visible in your reconstruction, is it not?
Yes,
And do you still have that laser pointer there?
I do.
Would you please point to the section of taillight that's missing? Okay. Appears to be a hole on the upper left side of that exhibit.
Is that a question?
Yes, it actually was. I should have said right or correct, but I didn't.
Yes.
Okay. And you would agree with me, and if we could zoom back out, Mr. Bates, you would agree with me that the portion of taillight that you did not have was strictly on the rear side of the taillight, if I can call it that.
I am not sure what orientation that goes on to a car.
Okay. But in any case, to this day, you do not know where the pieces that make up that hole are or what happened to them, correct?
I do not.
So as we see photos of this taillight put together, the only pieces that the investigators didn't find left the taillight with a small hole, which seems to align with Carrie Roberts' testimony of what that taillight looked like. Similarly, during Jen McCabe's cross-examination, we found out that she initially told investigators that Karen Reed's taillight was cracked or it had a crack in it. Now, you tell me, when you're looking at these photos, which one would you describe as being cracked or having a crack in it? Now, of course, you're going to have to imagine that this taillight over here is solid, just missing this single piece up here. But the other one, the one that the prosecution alleges is how Karen Reed's taillight looks, doesn't seem like calling it cracked would really suffice. Now, the absolute jaw-dropping moments for week 6 came with the Massachusetts State Police Sergeant, formerly known as Trooper Buchanan. Now, Sergeant Buchanan testified to numerous pieces of physical and digital evidence. He testified to video footage at CF McCarthy's showing Karen Reed having a number of drinks before they headed off to the waterfall. He goes over the receipts pulled from CF McCarthy's and the waterfall. He displays the articles of clothing that John O'Keefe was wearing at the time of the incident, and he answers some questions about a series of surveillance videos. During his testimony, we are finally introduced to the surveillance footage showing Karen Reed pulling out of the driveway at 5:07 on January 29th, where she's backing out and she comes into very close proximity to John O'Keefe's vehicle. Now, there has been much debate on whether or not Karen Reed actually hit the other vehicle, whereas the defense is using this video as proof of how Karen Reed actually damaged her vehicle. And that debate in week 6 has been settled. Now, during the direct testimony, Buchanan testified that Karen Reed's vehicle comes close to John O'Keefe's vehicle. However, he didn't say whether or not Karen Reed actually hit the other vehicle. However, Prosecutor Lally pointed out that as Karen Reed is driving away, you don't see any type of taillight fragments left from the impact, nor do you see any damage done to John O'Keefe's vehicle. I will say, however, that this video is pretty grainy. You can't really see much. So if there were pieces left behind, it would be pretty hard to detect them in this video.
Pause there for a second.
Now, as far as the operator of that vehicle, are you able to observe who that operator is within that vehicle?
I observed the vehicle being operated. I cannot identify who the individual is, and then from that shot right there.
From at any point in the shot of the video that you observed, are we able to recognize the operator vehicle?
Not from that shot, no.
Now, with respect to the timing of this video, what time in the morning is this video?
The timing of this video is approximately 5:07 a.m. when the defendant left the home through the garage via her vehicle.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you could play through that. Now, from this particular pause portion of the video, Sergeant, what, if anything, significance do you observe within the still shot of this portion of the video 153?
The portion of this video in the still shot presented identifies a missing, damaged rear right taillight, exposing the white light coming from the right side of that taillight.
And if you could, using the laser pointer before you draw your attention to what you're talking about as far as that area of the defendant's vehicle. Now, earlier in that video, did you observe the defendant's vehicle coming close to or coming into contact with Mr. O'Keefe's vehicle?
Yes, I did.
And as far as Mr. O'Keefe's vehicle, at least from this video, what, if any, damage did you observe to Mr. O'Keefe's vehicle?
No damage.
And as far as the ground area around where Mr. O'Keefe's vehicle is parked, specifically the rear of that vehicle, what, if any, red pieces or anything you observe on the ground around Mr. O'Keefe's vehicle?
Nothing was observed.
It's coming to give your breath.
Now, I created this comparison of Karen Reed's vehicle as she is leaving that driveway and the photo that the prosecution suggests was the condition of her taillight when it was taken into custody. Now, on the left, we do see her right taillight looks to be damaged. The question is, does that look to be more consistent with the defense's theory of a small hole when she backed into John O'Keefe's vehicle, or does it look to be consistent with the photo on the right? That will be up for the jury to decide. Now, this video has been one of the larger pieces of evidence for the defense, as it offers an explanation as to how Karen Reed's SUV was damaged and how the taillight was broken. But we'll get more into that a little bit later. Now, the prosecution also played an audio clip from an interview between Karen Reed and Trooper Buchanan in July of 2022.
So you're aware that you speak up at random calling Albert? I mean, if we're all on the same joke, right? My taillight was cracked and John was pulverized.
Now, I know that it's quite difficult to hear, but essentially you can hear her saying something along the lines of, you're aware he, meaning John O'Keefe, was beaten up by Brian and Colin Albert. I mean, we're all in on the same joke, right? My taillight was cracked and John was pulverized. Now, I'm not quite sure what the strategy of playing this audio for the jury was, and it is a little bit questionable as to why we are only hearing such a small fragment of that interview. But it seems to me from the jump, Karen Reed was adamant that she was being framed for John O'Keefe's murder. Now, during the cross-examination, as you can imagine, things really began to heat up. Alan Jackson asked Buchanan about John O'Keefe's clothing that Trooper Proctor recovered from John O'Keefe's hospital room on January 29th. Buchanan testified that the clothes were soaking wet, and being that regardless of your theory, John O'Keefe was laying out in the snow for at least 4 to 6 hours, his clothes were soaking wet. So they took them out and kind of laid them out on some butcher paper to let them dry naturally before they would be stored and placed into an evidence locker. However, Jackson noted that according to the records, they indicated that this evidence, these articles of clothing, weren't processed for nearly a week before they were put into evidence, which Buchanan submitted that in that time frame, Trooper Proctor would have had access to those articles of evidence. Now, as we get into the pieces of evidence that were found day after day after day, we went over, it was January 29th, February 4th, February 8th, February 10th, February 14th, February 18th, all of these days, Sergeant Buchanan explained this by saying that he and some of his men agreed to drive by 34 Fairview kind of every day, every other day, before work or after work, to kind of just drive by to see if as the snow melted if any evidence would present itself. Now, again, I don't understand why they didn't put some heaters out, help, with the process of melting that snow as quickly as possible. But here we are. However, with all of these pieces of taillight and glass that was found at the scene, the number of times that investigators went by 34 Fairview, Jackson pressed Buchanan that there were no reports written to memorialize these events until November of 2023, coincidentally around the same time that a federal probe was launched into this investigation. I don't even really know what to say. No report was written until November of 2023, nearly 2 years later. It just boggles my mind. Not to mention that Alan Jackson showed how there were no logs to document when these pieces of evidence were going in and out of custody, who had them, or what they were doing with them. The chain of custody in this case over just about every single item, I cannot think of a single item where the chain of custody was strong from the beginning to the very end. If anybody can point out a single piece of evidence that had the proper chain of custody protocols, please let me know, because I cannot think of a single one. Alan Jackson then settles the debate, showing this enhanced version of the video showing Karen Reed go in reverse, hit John O'Keefe's car, memorializing the moment where her taillight was broken.
Okay. In about the next 3 seconds, Sergeant, I'm asking you to pay special attention to the video. Go ahead. We can have the lights on. And you can take that down. Sergeant, were you able to see that video? I know it's not the clearest thing in the world. Were you able to see that video okay?
Yes,
What did you notice about the rear wheel of the Traverse?
Based on the motion in the shot with the snow falling, it appears that there is movement, but the video speaks for itself.
Now, the moment that I have been waiting for in week 6, during the cross-examination of Sergeant Buchanan, he testified about the surveillance video of the Sally Port in Canton PD where Karen Reed's SUV was stored after it was taken into custody. Now, Buchanan testified that this footage was a true and accurate representation of the events that took place. But during Alan Jackson's cross-examination, we find out that the video shown to the jury of Karen Reed's SUV inside that Sally Port was mirrored.
And Sergeant Buchanan, you testified for at least a half an hour about this video yesterday, correct?
I'm sorry, it was a long day. I don't know the timing of how long I
You
testified.
significantly testified about this video yesterday, did you not?
I testified about this video.
And you testified that it was true and accurate, correct?
Correct.
You testified that it was reflective of your observations of what was happening in that Sally Port that evening, correct?
I testified that this is a accurate scene and collection of video evidence from the Sally Port.
And as that truck sits in that Sally Port, just like this, it appears from all perspective that what we're looking at is the passenger side of the car, and that right rear taillight is right there shining in our face, correct? From this perspective.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
From this perspective, from the perspective that the jurors are looking at,
Okay.
from all indications, that would appear to be the right side of the truck, the passenger side of the truck, and that taillight that you can see is the right rear taillight from this perspective, correct?
The way it presents itself, yes.
And yesterday, during the entirety of your questioning by Mr. Lau, not once did you mention that this video is actually completely inverted.
I did not know.
Mr. Lau didn't ask you if it was inverted, correct?
That's correct.
And if I hadn't gotten up here and begun questioning you, that would be left uncorrected, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
Now, I don't know what the intentions of this evidence was. I don't know if they were trying to pull a fast one on the jury, but because ADA Lally never asked if this was a mirrored version, and Sergeant Buchanan never clarified that this video was in fact not a true and accurate representation, this looks really, really bad. And if I was on that jury, I would certainly think that the prosecution was attempting to mislead us. because we have to remember what the defense is alleging: a cover-up. So there is no room for these types of mistakes. Now, again, if this was kind of just an issue on itself, it might not hold that much weight. But on top of everything else, this looks really, really bad. Now, of course, Buchanan tried to recover, saying that a mirrored image or the mirrored footage is essentially the same. It's just reversed. And he's full of shit. In this case, where we are specifically looking at the back passenger side of a vehicle, and you fail to mention to us, or more importantly to the jury, that what we are actually looking at is the driver's side of that vehicle, it looks like you're being deceptive. Now, as Jackson plays the video, you can see somebody who we believe to be Trooper Proctor. We can't tell for sure because it's pretty grainy, but it looks to be Trooper Proctor hovering around the back portion of that vehicle, which we now know is where the damaged taillight was.
I'd like you to pay attention to the right rear of this car. And I know we're completely backward, but it's the far corner of the car. Do you see a person's head there?
It appears as if someone's still there.
And that person is located at or near what portion of the car?
In real life or as it's depicted?
Is the person near in real life, near the right rear taillight of the car?
Yes.
Matter of fact, standing there, hovering around it, correct?
We don't know the distance that they are in proximity to the actual vehicle. We just know that they're behind the vehicle. That
It looks like it's pretty close, doesn't it, Sergeant?
Objection.
Does that look like he's in close proximity to the right rear taillight?
As I said, I can't tell how far away he is from the vehicle.
His head's right there, sir. You can't tell that he's right next to the right rear taillight?
Objection.
Sustained.
All right. I want you to pay attention to what that person does as soon as the other person comes out from behind that car. Keep you seeing moving. Stop it. Do you see that person move?
I saw movement in the frame, yes.
Right when the other person is in eyesight of the person toward the right rear, correct?
I mean, the video speaks for itself.
Yeah, it does.
Now, somebody who, again, we believe to be Trooper Proctor, but whoever it is, somebody is hovering back in that area for a significant period of time where it actually looks like there's a time jump and you see somebody kind of appear out of nowhere.
Let's play it for about 10 seconds. Pause it. Did you see another person just appear toward the rear end of the car?
There was a fog of some sorts. It did appear as if a person was actually in. There was two people back there, and two people walked away, or one person walked away.
The timestamp jumped to 5:38:01. Correct?
I cannot see the timestamp, sir.
Now, in fairness, the surveillance system that they have, they did mention that it's motion activated. So was this footage manipulated, or was that person next to Karen Reed's SUV back there for so long that the motion cameras stopped detecting their movements, so it stopped recording? I honestly don't really know which one's worse, but either way, it just seems like yet another coincidence that the prosecution has to explain. And given what the defense is alleging, how can the prosecution make this look any worse? It is unbelievable. My mind is blown by how bad this continues to get. But with all of the fuckery that we have witnessed throughout this trial, I cannot imagine any reasonable jury coming to a guilty verdict for intentional murder with all of these coincidences just stacking up on one another. Now, at the end of the day, we are still during the cross-examination of Sergeant Buchanan. Alan Jackson wanted to introduce a thumb drive into evidence. However, because the prosecution hadn't seen what was on that thumb drive, Judge Cannoni essentially dismissed the jury, and we will find out if that thumb drive will be admitted into evidence on Monday. We don't know what's on there. What I'm speculating, I'm wondering if Alan Jackson perhaps put the surveillance footage in the Sally Port kind of in the correct orientation, the unmirrored version of it, the true and accurate representation of it. And perhaps we can see what was actually taking place in that Sally Port that day. But we're just going to have to wait until Monday to see if that's the case. Now, before the jury left the courtroom, Judge Cannoni suggested that they will have this case in their hands ready for deliberations during the last week of June. So we've still got a lot of testimony to go, but it seems to be an increasingly steep uphill battle for the prosecution. They've got a lot of obstacles to overcome when it comes to proving that this investigation wasn't completely botched, whether intentional or sheer incompetence. Who really knows? But it doesn't look good. And I certainly have my speculations at this point. I can't find myself finding Karen Read guilty unless they have like video footage of her actually hitting John O'Keefe with her vehicle. And even that I would be skeptical of at this point. I have never seen a more terrible investigation. It's truly unbelievable. It's one of those cases that is inevitably going to be made into movies to document how outrageous all of this truly is. Now, at the end of the week, Prosecutor Lally filed a motion to exclude an expert witness that the defense intends to call during their case in chief. Now, with this expert testimony, apparently it's from an ER doctor who is believed will testify that the injuries John O'Keefe sustained are more consistent with an animal attack, or perhaps more specifically, a dog. Now, Prosecutor Lally suggests that the defense didn't tell them or didn't give them proper notification that they were intending to call this witness until just within a few weeks ago. Now, Judge Cannoni can either do one of three things, I believe. She can either sustain the motion to exclude this expert testimony altogether. She can call for a voir dire and have this witness testify in the outside of the presence of the jury, or she can just dismiss the motion altogether and just have this expert testify. So I believe we will hear on that ruling on Monday. So that's where we left off on week 6. And just when I think that I cannot be any more shocked and surprised or shocked and horrified by this trial, I am proven wrong time and time again. And we haven't even heard from Trooper Proctor yet. Whether the prosecution will call him remains to be unseen. I think they're kind of damned if they do, damned if they don't. I think it will be in their better interest to call him because it's going to look very, very bad if they don't. But if there were this many issues and you even had the slightest hesitation in calling the lead investigator, you probably shouldn't have tried this case to begin with. But that's just my opinion. I want to hear your thoughts on this case. As we are 6 weeks in, going on 7 weeks, do you think Karen Read is guilty? Is there any evidence that you can point to me that shows that she is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt? What are your thoughts on this footage in the Sally Port? Do you think that it was mirrored intentionally to mislead the jury, or do you think it was just an honest mistake? I want to hear all of your thoughts and theories down below. Make sure you like this video before you go, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.